Ich würde das Wort jetzt an den
And with
Christian wieder
that, I'd
übergeben,
hand
der
over
neben
to
mir sitzt.
Christian, sitting next to me.
Und der Christian wird
And Christian
jetzt
will introduce Tim.
Also, jetzt kommt Tim.
Right, our next speaker is Tim Hartshorne from Michigan in the United States. And his topic is why the behavior of children with CHARGE syndrome makes sense. About his background, he's a professor of psychology and he himself has a son who has CHARGE.
Okay, Tim, now it's your turn.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Well, it's morning here. It's afternoon there. I'm so pleased to be able to participate in this online conference. I've been missing everybody. It was so sad when we had to cancel before, but at least we have a chance to connect this way, and so I'm very much looking forward to this. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for allowing me to be here. This is going to hopefully be useful to people. So the title of this is trying to make sense of behavior. And I think the implication to the title is that behavior can make sense. And I think this is really important because so often people think that behavior is senseless. It's just there. It needs to be gotten rid of. But let's see if we can figure out ways to make sense of it. So next. So that's weird. Must be autistic. So this is my son, Jacob. Jacob is here enjoying his finger paints and using them in ways that are not exactly common. So you can say, well, that's really weird. Jacob, why would you put finger paints all over your hands and all over your face? But let me ask you, have you ever wished you could do something like that? Doesn't that look like it could be a bit of fun? It's weird, yes. Very unusual, very strange. But then think about all the people that you know. Is there anybody you know who is not weird? Aren't you a little bit weird? So, yeah, this seems odd, seems strange. But what makes us suddenly autistic? Is it because Jacob has CHARGE syndrome and is doing something weird? Then we have to call it autism. Next. So there seems to be a presumption that if you have a disability, then if the behavior that you're doing seems weird, it must be part of a diagnosis. Let's see if we can figure out how to diagnose this thing. We could try autism. We can try obsessive compulsive disorder. We can try all sorts of different kinds of diagnoses because clearly it can't be something that a kid's just enjoying doing. Also, it can have very little meaning or no meaning whatsoever. And that's the thing that kind of bothers me a lot, is that if we see a kid doing something unusual, weird, different, strange, and they have a disability, there can't be any reason for them doing it other than the fact that they have a disability. And also there seems to be the idea that it's out of the child's control. There's nothing they can do about it. And that often leads to us, providing medications to try to stop the behavior because the kid can't learn to stop it themselves. So I think otherwise. I think all behavior has a purpose. People engage in behavior because it satisfies something that they want. There's purpose to it. Also, all behavior is communication. So if Jacob is painting his face like that, that tells me, one, that he's probably enjoying himself. Secondly, that he's enjoying the sensation of rubbing stuff onto his face. Now, Jacob has gone through periods when he didn't rub stuff on his face. There was finger paints. He used feces. I didn't like that nearly as much. But to Jacob, it probably meant the same thing. It was interesting to rub something that was stinky and smelly and dirty on his face because it was interesting and provided him with some kind of a sensation. So it's not like, oh, there's that disabled kid doing something disgusting. It was Jacob who's trying to do something interesting for himself. All right, next one. So this is my wife, Nancy, walking with Jacob when he was less than 1 year old. One of the things that was very puzzling about Jacob was that when he cried, what do you do when a baby cries, right? You pick them up and you walk with them. You put them over your shoulder, pat their back, maybe lift them up and down a little bit. And Jacob would cry. We'd pick him up. We'd try all those things. And he would just cry and cry and cry. I remember one day when my in-laws were over and my father-in-law was trying, well, I can do this, and to get Jacob to calm down, jiggling him around. And nothing was working. I had him back, holding him, and I finally, because I was exhausted, just laid Jacob back down in his crib. And immediately he stopped crying. This is not right. This is weird. This is not normal. Babies aren't supposed to be quiet and settle down when you put them back in their crib. They're supposed to do that when you're holding them. This was very confusing, but it worked. So that meant that frequently we would just leave Jacob alone in his crib or on the floor because he seemed to be content and happy that way. So next. So why do we think that Jacob might have behaved that way? There he is on the floor. The dog seems to think it's a good idea too. We didn't know it at first, but Jacob had tactile defensiveness. So touch, particularly touch in certain parts of his body, was painful to him. I remember when he was born and in the intensive care, they told me to just keep holding his hand, and that would be helpful to him. It probably was torture to him to have me holding his hand, but we didn't know that. So one possibility is Jacob cried when we were holding him because it was painful. Also, being carried might have been confusing to his senses. Our kids have balance issues, and those vestibular problems also influence our vision. So it's very difficult to be focused on something and then look away and then find it again. So when we're walking with Jacob holding him, he must have had a really difficult time focusing in on his vision at anything. So maybe he was just being confused in his senses. Another explanation is that this was just his preference. He preferred to be left alone as opposed to be engaged with. And his crying, which led us to pick him up, might have been because he had some gas. But that didn't mean that he wanted to be held. He just wanted the pain to go away. But it took us a long time to figure this out because it's not natural. Once I figured it out, it was kind of interesting. When my next child was born and she would cry, I would put her down. And then, wait a minute. No, she probably likes to be held. Jacob had trained me. And it's really hard not knowing how to comfort your child. I don't know if all the parents out here have experienced that when you know something's terribly wrong because you can tell by the behavior, but you just can't find a way to comfort. And that hurts because that's what we do. We comfort our kids. And then when the behavior advances from something which is, you prefer to be left alone to he's doing something really awful, it's even more heartbreak. But it begins, I believe, with trying to understand what the behavior might be telling us. All right, next. So here are some common deafblind behaviors. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who's deafblind engages in any of these behaviors, but we do tend to see them in individuals who are deafblind. Eye pressing, have you seen that when they press something against their eye? Jacob sometimes uses a spoon, try to discourage that, but he's done it. Finger flicking in front of his eyes, rocking, tapping his body or tapping objects, self-injurious behavior where he's hurting himself, mouthing objects, the tactile defensiveness I talked about where you really resist being touched, clinging, spinning. Oh my gosh, Jacob loves to spin. Vocal tics where they do, or Jacob does this, putting his lips together and blowing so it makes a vibration sound. Feces smearing that I mentioned we went through. Lining things up, extreme preferences, darting or running off. Learned helplessness where I just can't do anything. Being submissive, staring at lights, inappropriate vocalization. So if these are commonly, not all the time, but commonly seen in people who are deafblind, is this just coincidence? Or is there something about having the dual sensory impairment which increases the likelihood that that person might choose one of these behaviors because in some way it helps them? All right, next. So what's the difference? Behavior is learned and behavior is chosen. Now, of course, we learn behaviors. There's no question about that. But I think too often we forget that behavior is also chosen. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is not how they learned to do that or why did they learn to do that as much as why would they have chosen to do that? Because when you ask why they chose it, it helps you to begin thinking about the purpose and the communication of the behavior. There's meaning behind it. Like I can learn things which have no meaning, but I choose things because it serves a purpose for me. So next one. So it changes things. We look at behavior as chosen. So you all probably immediately recognize there's a kid with charge doing their hanging upside down thing. In this case, looking at the iPad. That's an interesting way to look at it. Did anybody, do you think, teach this kid to do this? I mean, why would you teach a kid to do it? So is it learned behavior in the sense that it's been taught and reinforced? Or did this kid choose to do this? And then why in the world would they ever choose to do this? It makes no sense. I mean, I guarantee you I've never looked at anything from that particular position. But when you think about it, okay, what's going on here? One thing is the head is very, very stable, right? It's pressing against the cushion of the couch. And even if it's not, if it's just hanging, it's very stable because it doesn't have to be held up by the muscles of the neck. So the head's stable. So if you have balance problems, now that's taken care of, right? And your eyes are going to be able to focus better because you're not trying to keep your head steady. Other thing is that with coloboma, most of the time coloboma block the upper visual field, right? So if you're looking ahead at somebody, you have to tip your head up to look forward. If you're upside down and the upper visual field's still being affected, but now it's at the bottom of your visual field, you can look directly across. So visually, this is a lot easier for him to look at his iPad than it would be if he were upright. Another advantage of this is the proprioceptive feedback. So proprioception is that awareness of where your body is and where the parts of your body are. So with his head pressed against the couch, he knows where his head is. He can feel it. He can feel his neck because everything is hanging down. So that puts pressure into the shoulders. and from the shoulders into the back, and then into the butt. And because his legs are pressed as well, and looks like his arms might be as well, he knows where every part of his body is at this moment. And that gives him a great deal of confidence that he can be in control of every aspect of himself. So this makes a heck of a lot of sense. Is it weird? Absolutely weird. But does it have a purpose? Yes. There's a purpose to this. Now, we can try to interfere and tell him he can't do this, but then you're taking away the opportunity for him to have some moments when life is good. Because now he's not going to stay there for long. Blood will still rush into his head. He's not going to stay there forever. But for a period of time, it helps him to be able to compensate for the vestibular issues, feel proprioceptively, and view something directly. All right, next. So, the child chooses a behavior to solve their situation. Does anybody ever teach kids to pick their nose? I think most kids figure that out completely on their own. And it works, right? I mean, you stick that finger in the nose, you pull out some snot, and life is good. And so they're likely to continue to do it. Or maybe it doesn't work. Maybe the stuff that just can't be gotten out. But look at the reaction of other people. Oh my gosh, get your finger out of your nose. Oh no, that looks so gross. That's disgusting. Well, this is really fun. And so I'll continue to do it. And that way, it can, if it's reinforced for very long with the reaction of other people, it can become a habit. I mean, my youngest son, there was quite a while when he would just go around with a finger in his nose. Aaron, get that finger out of your nose. And he would temporarily, but then be right back in there. I don't know whether it became comforting to him or whatever, but that's one of the problems that we face, isn't it? Kid does something because it serves a purpose. But then, based on our reaction, based on our response to it, if that is kind of interesting too, eventually this behavior can become so reinforced that now they're engaging in it, not because it's serving a function for them anymore or a purpose for them anymore, just because it's something that they do automatically. And I think some of the behavior that we see in charge can have gotten to that point because we didn't know how we needed to handle the situation, and we're actually reinforcing it, so it occurred over and over again. All right, next one. So in case you doubted me, I actually emailed or messaged the Facebook page in the U.S. for Charge and said, anybody have pictures of their kid upside down? I think by the next day I had about 80 of them. So this is just a sampling. Very, very common. So again, this is not taught. This has a purpose. This has a function. Now, think about, again, what happens based on our reaction. So the girl in the upper left with the red dress, I'll have a slide of her later too. She was told in school she could not hang upside down. Right? This is not appropriate. You can't do this in school. And so they would make her sit back up. Now, she felt this need to hang upside down for a moment. Her mother told me when she came home from school, if she'd had a good day, she might hang upside down for 5 minutes. But if she had a bad day, it could go as long as 15 minutes. And bad days would occur when you're told you can't do something that you feel compelled to do for a moment because it's going to serve a purpose in terms of helping you stabilize your body, get the proprioceptive feedback. So what happened is that her behavior got really, really bad. She would have temper tantrums. She would have meltdowns. And then she would start hitting and kicking people. And so they removed her from her classroom and put her behind a barrier and kept her from other people because she got violent. All that could have been eliminated at least at that moment, if it let her hang for a few minutes. But since it's stupid stuff to do, you shouldn't hang. It's inappropriate. We don't do that in school. It was stopped. All right, next one. So, as I say, chosen behavior can become a habit based on what happens next. So, balloons. So that's Jacob several years ago on Halloween when he was the old man from the movie Up. So, the old man movie Up, if you've seen that, has a suit and holds the balloons. But the reason I have that balloons there is because I did consult with a family whose son was obsessed with balloons. If they went to the store and where they shopped there was a balloon stand, he would go immediately to the balloon stand and he would stand there until his mother bought him every balloon. He wasn't satisfied with just one. He had to have them all. And if his mother tried to move him from the balloon stand without buying him all the balloons, then he would have a temper tantrum and have a total fit. Now, it's really fun, right, to be in the middle of a large store like Walmart, which is where this was, and have your kid have a temper tantrum, especially when they look different. Then you have everybody staring at you, thinking you're a horrible person. So, of course, the mother did whatever she could, as she bought all the balloons, and then he was satisfied. I knew a kid who had 12 vacuum cleaners because he insisted on his mother buying him every vacuum cleaner he saw, or at least one each trip. So, of course, the mother with the balloon, she stopped taking him to Walmart because it just wasn't working. Now, if you go back to the beginning, balloons are interesting. Balloons are cool. And so getting the kid a balloon is really fun. But we can't allow this to become something which becomes a demand. The way we worked it for this particular kid is that we went to Walmart. We took him to Walmart, and he had 3 things he had to do. One was to buy yogurt, I remember that, and there were 2 other things he had to buy. So he went to get them and put them in the basket. Then he had a choice. He could have a balloon, or when he got home, he could play on his computer. And he chose waiting to play on his computer instead of having a balloon, which tells you right away that the balloon was not the thing. It was, this is what I do when I go to Walmart. I go and demand a balloon. What we wanted to shift that was, no, when I go to Walmart, I do some shopping, and then I have a choice of something that I would really like. So that worked pretty darn well. I was kind of surprised, actually. Breaking TVs. I don't know if any of your kids have broken the TV, but I hear from several families where their child has just gone over and knocked the TV over so it's smashed, or they've just taken something and smashed it themselves. One case, I think they threw it downstairs. Not good for TVs. So why in the world would a kid do that? Well, I think, and I don't know, right? But I think it can start out because have you noticed that sometimes your kid goes from a very calm state, which things are very steady, and then within seconds, they're over-aroused and they're making noises and they're behaving like they're really, really upset. And that can happen in seconds. So I could be in a room in which the TV is on and playing, and I'm okay, but suddenly that noise and the images from the TV all of a sudden overwhelm me. And the only thing I can think to do is get rid of it. And so I run over there and I smash it. So it could make sense. Of course, the problem is we can't have kids smashing TVs. And a lot of families would then go just buy a new TV and the same thing happens. So they stop buying TVs altogether or lock them up in a different room. So you don't want a habit to develop when the kid sees, there's a TV now. I know the TV upsets me. Now I'm going to go get rid of it. We don't want that to develop at all. But if we understand the child was suddenly overwhelmed and we develop some strategies so when our child becomes overwhelmed, we immediately help them into a calm space, or we turn off the TV immediately before the kid can get there, you have a chance of changing the behavior because you understand this is not someone who just hates TV. This is someone who hates the stimulation, overstimulation they're receiving from the TV. Feces smearing, I mentioned that this is a problem that we've dealt with. Again, you have to think about what problem this solves. And the immediate one is that, before Jacob learned to sit on the toilet, he'd have some feces in his pants. So to get rid of that, he'd just reach back there and he'd have him. And then he could wipe his hands and then wipe his face. He doesn't have a sense of smell, so it wasn't that gross. He didn't know this was disgusting stuff. So it solved the problem of getting the stuff out of his pants, and then suddenly it becomes entertainment. And the problem, of course, he would walk around the house touching things before we knew it had happened. So it was disgusting. So how do you get rid of it? So you ask yourself, okay, we got to make sure that this toilet training, at least with the bowel movements, gets up to snuff, right? And he did learn pretty well to go on the toilet, and we just had to be with him. So after he went, he didn't immediately reach back, right? So, okay, let's control your hands. I'll immediately wipe you. Takes away that problem. But the other thing is the enjoyment of the smearing. So we did go to finger paints. We also went to shaving cream. We went to Play-Doh, and have a lot of these available to him to choose or to offer them to him so that he could do those things to get the same kind of stimulation of wiping them on his face or squeezing them, whatever he wanted to do, without it being something we didn't want him to use. And the issue went away. It didn't go away immediately. It probably took probably over a year, so you got to be patient. But it did go away. He hasn't done that in years now, which is, of course, very nice. The last one I have here is button pulling. For kids who have gastrostomies and they're fed directly to the stomach, you have that button that sticks into your stomach. And I've known several kids who, when they got upset, they'd reach down and they'd pull it out. Okay, so if your kid pulls out their gastrostomy button, what do? I think most of us panic because, oh my gosh, I've got to get that back in. And how can I get that back in? Because typically, my understanding is you have no more than 20 minutes to get it back in the hole without having to go to the emergency room. But what happens if the kid pulls it out when you're not around? And then you go check on them, and it's been more than 20 minutes. Now you got to run to the hospital. So really interesting things happen if I pull out my gastrostomy button. I get all these panic reactions from the people around me. And you can tell someone's in a panic reaction, right? They're almost having a meltdown themselves. Really, really interesting. And if I'm upset about something and I pull that out, then I've made my mom or my dad upset. So they'll be just as upset as I am. So there, I'm unhappy. Now you're unhappy. This is great. I don't know a better way to make my parents unhappy than to pull out my gastrostomy button. So what do? We don't want this to be because what happens when it becomes a habit is that the kid just does that all the time. And this one kid I was consulting with was doing it nearly every day, I believe, for a while. It's not okay. So one thing we have to do is watch our reaction. All right? If I'm getting all panicky and all upset, and how can you? You can't do that. No. Right? It doesn't go well. But if I can be very, very calm about it, oh my gosh, okay. Slide down, please. Let me insert this back in. Okay, we're all good. That's a start. All right, changing the way we respond to them. It's also a time to teach them other ways to let us know how upset they are. And you have to decide for yourself what is a better thing than pulling out the gastrostomy button. Virtually anything. And that's when, behavior can be learned. When I'm saying, instead of this, let's do this instead. Instead of pulling out your button, why don't you start throwing things? I don't like that much either, but it's better than pulling out your gastrostomy button. Oh, I tried to advance. All right, next one. Oh, yeah, there it is. So understand behavior first. So there's Jacob. This is actually David Brown's favorite picture of Jacob. He uses it in many of his presentations. But it's my kid, so I have priority. So Jacob is probably getting ready to go outside for a walk. The sunglasses he's wearing are not his sunglasses, probably his caregivers who had them off for a moment, and Jacob grabbed them and put them on. I just thought that was pretty funny. Look, there's Jacob in the sunglasses, but David pointed out stuff I had not realized before. Look at Jacob's lips. They're very much pursed together. When he's pressing on his lips like that, he is getting proprioceptive feedback to his mouth, to his cheeks, to his chin, to his neck. He's finding out where his head is. Then look at his fingers. They're very much pressing together. If you take your fingers and do what Jacob does and press them together, you get proprioceptive feedback through your fingers, hands, wrists, arms, elbows, shoulders. I don't know what he's doing with his feet, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's pressing his feet together because he knows he's about to go outside and walk. He will do much better if he knows where his body parts are. He knows where his muscles are. He's really preparing himself very, very nicely so that he can find all the parts of his body that he needs for walking. So there's nothing wrong with that behavior anyway, but understand behavior first before we try to change it. So important. I know it's not easy to understand. It takes a lot of powers of observation. You know, David's an amazing observer of behavior, and those of you who have consulted with him know that. He's helped me a lot in terms of making my observations better. It's something we have to learn. Just what I've done with Jacob over the years when he's done something weird is ask myself, why might I do that? What would it do for me? And sometimes I've actually done the exact behavior. I will not hang upside down, but many of the behaviors to see what it's like. Say, why would I do that? I might do that because I'm experiencing something and this actually helps me. So, next one. All right, over the years as I've tried to figure out behavior in charge syndrome, my students and I came up with the idea of this triangle of three major issues that can lead to children choosing difficult behavior. So pain is at the top because you always want to rule out pain first. Then we have sensory issues. Our kids are multisensory impaired. We need to understand what these issues are. And then anxiety was something we came to probably last, but I think it's extremely important. I have self-regulation in the middle because that's what we want to do is we want to be able to teach kids to self-regulate their pain, their sensory systems, and their anxiety. So it's been really helpful to me as a way to think through the issues. And actually, you know, now when people call me or email me and say, can we talk about behavior? I find as I'm talking to them that I'm kind of going through pain, sensory systems, and anxiety just kind of naturally because it seems like it's touching in on the most important issues. All right, next one. So there's Jacob's ear. It's kind of a fuzzy picture of Jacob's ear because he would not hold still. He doesn't like to do that. But the importance of his ear is the story, and I know some of you probably heard me tell it before, but there was a time, it was between Christmas and New Year's, when Jacob stopped. Well, initially, it just took him hours to fall asleep at night. Right? He would get him into bed. he'd lie down, and within 10 minutes, he was standing up again. No, Jacob, you can't. You got to go to sleep. Of course, translate, I need to go to sleep. So put him back down again. It'd take a couple of hours. He'd finally fall asleep. The next night, it took longer, and then he wasn't sleeping at all. My wife took him to the doctor. The doctor looked him all over. Couldn't find anything, a little wax in his ear, but couldn't find anything wrong. Said, well, we may have to put him on some medication to make him sleep. And Nancy came home kind of discouraged, saying, medication? I said, I don't want to medicate this. This is not something that needs medication. This is something that's wrong, and we have to understand what's wrong. If a new behavior is new, something is wrong, right? So how can we figure this out? So after a little bit more time of not sleeping, Nancy took him back to the doctor, and the doctor looked him over and then realized that the wax in his ear was not wax. It was a foreign object in his ear that was stuck and infecting his ear canal. And actually, it was rubbing a little bit against his eardrum, which if you've ever had that happen, is extremely painful. So, of course, he couldn't sleep because when he lay down, this foreign object would rub against his eardrum and he'd sit up again where it relieved the pressure a little bit. So we called the ear doctor who said, well, you could probably bring him in about a week and I can see what's going on. We weren't going to wait a week, so we went to the emergency room and we held him down while the doctor pulled the object out. I'm sure that was painful too, but Jacob started sleeping again. You always want to figure out if there's pain going on. In charge, pain comes from all different sources. One of the most important is the whole gastrointestinal system. Pain. Jacob recently had a bowel obstruction, and the way we could really tell is because the pain was unusual, his stomach was hard, and knew something was going on. So he's fine. But when you look at that behavior, ask yourself, could the kid be in pain, and check that out. All right, next. So why is pain so important? Well, obviously it can affect normal brain and neurological development. If infants are experiencing pain, the brain has to take care of that, and so it doesn't necessarily develop as normally and as fast as it typically does. It can affect sleep. How many times have you lain awake at night because something hurt? It can interfere with the exploration of the environment and learning. If you're in pain, do you like to explore what's going on? Do you like to sit down and listen to a lecture? Probably not. It can interfere with the development of attachment and trust. If the people around me aren't able to help me with the pain, then can I really rely on them? And then, really importantly, once tolerated, can be ignored, even while it's affecting health and behavior. So I've heard people say, oh, kids with charge, they can handle lots and lots of pain. They don't seem to feel it. This is not true. They have learned to tolerate it. As I get older, I realize I got parts of my body that sometimes hurt a little bit, maybe a shoulder, maybe a leg from time to time. I pretty much ignore it because it's just going on, and it's just a part of life. So why even bother? So I think many kids with charge who have ongoing issues with pain just learn to ignore it. Jacob walked around for, 5 days in a broken leg, and we didn't know it, and he wasn't telling us. So he couldn't feel it. No, I know he could feel it. And if you look back, you could see his behavior was just different. But we couldn't associate that behavior with one thing, and probably weren't smart enough to realize we need to check out pain very quickly. All right, next. So there's a brain. The thing for the brain is it sits in your skull. And it can do stuff, but in order to do stuff, it kind of has to be told that something needs to be done. So how does the brain know what needs to be done? Well, it comes to your senses. It sees something. It hears something. It smells something. It tastes something, right? And then the brain can react. The brain is not getting any information from the sensory systems. It doesn't know what it's supposed to do. When that sensory system is diminished, maybe not totally absent, the brain may have a hard time interpreting it. It's like, imagine that your vision suddenly changed and so all you saw was shapes. Would you be able to figure out what those shapes were very easily? And so your brain really has to work hard now to interpret, what the senses are telling it. Of course, with our kids, they typically have these deficiencies from birth, and the brain's adjusted to that, but doesn't mean that the brain really fully understands the environment the way we understand the environment if our sensory systems are working. Next. So sensory deficits in charge. As we know, we used to call kids with charge deafblind, and then we switched to multisensory impaired because the kids have sensory neural hearing loss. They have coloboma. By the way, not every kid with charge has all of these things, right? And that's one of the interesting things about charge. Smell and the sense of smell actually begins really early in neonatal development and the nasal buds, but sometimes in charge, the nasal buds don't develop properly. So the kids have diminished or absent sense of smell. Taste, of course, taste is very much related to smell. And have you noticed that your kids sometimes really prefer strong tastes because they can actually notice them? The tactile, the touch. Well, sometimes the touch, especially like palms of the hands, bottoms of the feet, certain parts of the trunk can be highly painful. Then we have the vestibular, the balance issues, and the proprioceptive, kind of the awkwardness because I'm not sure where my foot is, and so I put down my foot. It's not just the balance issue, it's also, oh, there's my foot, now I'm okay. So truly multisensory impaired. Next. So when we have sensory processing problems, the brain trying to make sense of all of these, limited, some painful, many confusing. Well, one thing, the sensory processing issues are frequently occurring in genetic syndromes like charge, especially those that have any kind of sensory issues. But they're exacerbated by the sensory impairments. So some kids just have a hard time processing sensory systems anyway. Some people think that's characteristic of autism, for example. But in autism, they have intact sensory systems. The problem for kids with charge is the sensory systems are not intact. And so sometimes that mimics autistic-like behavior, but it's not coming from processing problems due to processing problems with autism. It's processing problems due to the brain trying to figure out what's going on. These processing problems are associated with anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Even incidental sensory events may overload the child. So you may think the kid's happy, but suddenly the kid is like somebody shouted on the TV, and now they're over-aroused. Didn't bother anybody else. But now the sensory processing problems are emerging. It can lead to lots of self-stimulation because you think about it, if I'm stimulating myself with whatever I do for self-stimulation, I'm controlling my environment. I'm controlling the world. My brain knows what I'm doing. As soon as I stop self-stimulating, then the world's going to impinge on me and it can be very difficult. Obviously, we need to intervene very carefully when the kids are having sensory problems because they can lead to meltdowns. I watched this kid one time. She was in a gymnasium working out. She was working with weights, and it was such a noisy environment. People were shouting, running around. There was music blaring, and I watched her have a meltdown. I was not responsible for her. I was there as an observer, okay? I wasn't just being unkind, but I watched the meltdown occur. It took about 30 seconds, and suddenly you can see a change in her face, and pretty soon she's having a really horrible behavioral outburst. So you need to recognize these things, intervene very carefully to avoid it getting to the point of if her teacher and aide had recognized it sooner and gotten her out of there, probably could have avoided the meltdown altogether. All right, next one. Okay, what could our kids possibly have to be anxious about? Well, I don't know. Anxiety seems to be everywhere today. I asked my college students, I think this was actually before the pandemic. Yeah, it was, because they were in class with me. And I said, so what percentage of college students do you think have severe anxiety problems? And this kid raised his hand and said, about 120%. All right, that was a little high. The next person said maybe 80%. The data seems to suggest probably 40, but nobody really knows. So anxiety is out there anyway, but what do our kids have to be anxious about? So next slide. All right. We like to know what's going on. If you think so much of our conversation with one another is about what's going on, we often begin with the weather, because that's usually going on. But think about, what are we doing right now? And sometimes we'll talk about that, right? Yeah, right now we're at a conference and we're sitting and listening to a speaker. Okay, that's what we're doing right now. We're not at the conference, but next best thing. What are we going to do next? Well, there's going to be a little bit of a break before California time kicks in, and Julie can possibly, it is Julie, right? Can possibly give a talk. What did we just do? Well, we were waiting for and watching Claudia get everything set up, and we got up in the morning and did whatever. So that's so much of what our conversation is about. But think about the life of many of our kids with CHARGE syndrome or adults with CHARGE syndrome. Do they always know what's happening right now? Sometimes our kids get diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, because they're so distracted. Well, if you're not processing very well what's going on in your world right now, wouldn't you become kind of distracted? But if I don't know what's going on right now, could I become anxious about that? I wonder what's happening. Why don't I know what's happening? What's about to happen? So what are we going to do next? Have you ever been with your kid when they kept asking over and over again? Are we going to the pharmacy? Yes, dear. Are we going to the pharmacy? Yes, dear. Are we going to the pharmacy? Well, that can be some anxiety around, are we really going to do stuff? Because you tell me we're going to go. I don't know how long that's going to be because time is a kind of a difficult concept. I need to make sure because it makes me kind of anxious to think about what we're going to do and how it's going to go and all the aspects of it. So I'm going to check in with you pretty frequently. It's kind of like taking your other kids on a long car trip. Are we there yet, Daddy? Are we there yet, Daddy? It's the same kind of thing of just being uncertain. And what did we just do? As I say, time is kind of an issue. So remembering what we did, a lot of people in deafblind world are developing experience books so kids can put together a little book about what they've just done so they can remember, can talk about it. I think where this hit me the most was I realized, I think my wife, who's much smarter than I am, pointed out to me that Jacob might be lying on his bed. He still prefers lying down to standing up. He'll sit for a while, but then he'll go and lie down. He's lying on his bed, but I got to take him to the grocery store. So I walk in, I sign, get up. He gets up. I take him in, I put his shoes on, or he puts his shoes on. He's pretty good at that. I take him out of the car, stick him in the car, and we're off. Now, he was having a perfectly fine time lying on his bed. Suddenly, Dad came along and interfered. And what's going on? I don't know what's going on. Sometimes we get to the grocery store, and Jacob had a way of planting his feet in the seat in front of him. So you could not move him. So you could not get him out of the car. Because, by golly, I don't know where we're going. I don't know why we're even here. And I'm not ready to cooperate with you. Now, we don't always think about that as anxiety, but that is a sign of anxiety when a person is refusing to do something. Next slide. So when we're not sure what's going on, we can become anxious. And we can engage in behavior which expresses our feelings. And we'll look in a moment at some of the behaviors that people who are anxious may be engaging in. But lots of times these behaviors make us feel more secure because at least we're doing something. So if you've ever been so anxious that you went into your bedroom and lay down on the bed and onto your side and sucked your thumb, all right, a little bit of regressive behavior, but nevertheless it's comforting. It's something you learned as a kid that would help you settle down. Sometimes our kids are doing some stuff like that, although it doesn't seem why that would help. So next slide has a list. So, and this is just a list of typical behaviors when somebody is anxious that I got from another person. And the citation doesn't show there, but if you want to know where I got this, you can email me and I'd be happy to give you the citation. But this person pointed out that, pessimism and negative thinking patterns can be a way of dealing with anxiety. Nothing's ever going to work out. I know nothing's going to work out. It's all going to be bad. Yeah, now your kid with charge might not choose that particular one. The next one always struck me as really important. Anger, aggression, restlessness, irritability, tantrums, defiance. Wow, I thought that was just being a really nasty kid. But it can be a kid being nasty because they are so anxious. Crying. Oh, I've skipped over. Constant worrying about things that might happen or have happened. Are we going to the pharmacy? Are we going to the pharmacy? Crying. Physical complaints like stomach aches, headaches, fatigue. Avoidance behaviors. When I was a kid and I was scared to go to school some days, I could get a stomach ache in a matter of minutes if I really focused and get to stay home. That was avoidance behavior, but it's also creating a stomach ache as a way to deal with my anxiety. Sleeping difficulties, perfectionism. I got to make sure everything is right. Excessive clinginess and separation anxiety, procrastination, poor memory and concentration, withdrawal from activities and family interactions, just going off by yourself, and having problems with eating. So all of these signs of potential anxiety. All right, next one. So I've illustrated the pain, sensory issues, and the anxiety of that triangle. Now I want to talk about self-regulation. And I obviously don't have time in the last 5 minutes before we get to questions to go into self-regulation in detail. But it's a term I hadn't thought a lot about until I started really getting into charge behavior and realizing that some of what we see is the kid just not being able to regulate, monitor, control, manage their behavior. We talked about the kid going from 0 to 100 in terms of their arousal levels and their degree of calmness to whatever the opposite of calmness is. But the kids can go very, very fast, right? From calm to over-aroused and acting out. Self-regulation is that skill to help you manage your level of arousal, your level of participation in such a way that you can get things done. So it always begins with, what is it that I want to get done? What do I want to have happen? And then how do I make it happen? So you've got to have a goal. I said before, all behavior has a purpose. When the kids really know what it is that they want to do, they tend to be pretty much in control as long as they can do it. If the kid wants to hang upside down and no one's objecting, they're good. If a kid wants to smear their feces and no one's getting in the way, they're good, right? I've never seen Jacob upset when he was smearing his feces. I was upset, but Jacob wasn't so upset. So what is the goal? And when people know what it is that they want to do, they find ways to manage to do it, but they have to keep focused. They can't be distracted from the goal. They've got to keep focused on what they want to accomplish. So if you want to study for an exam, you can't just run off with friends, right? No, I need to study for this exam. I know what I need to do. You can't just start drinking 3 or 4 beers because it's not going to help you study for your exam, right? So I know what I have to do to control myself to study for an exam. Well, kids with charge have ideas of things they want to do. You all know that. So helping them to direct that goal, to regulate pain, sensory systems, and anxiety is what we need to do. So next slide. So self-regulation of pain. Problems with pain. One is pain anxiety and pain catastrophizing. You know, you're having a really painful day, but it gets worse and worse as it gets later in the day, right? And in the evening, and you go into bed, and you wonder if you're going to be alive in the morning, right? Catastrophizing about what this pain means. It's, the end of everything. Or even if you're not that bad, but just anxiety, what am I going to do? I'm going to manage this. What's the doctor going to say? So part of regulating pain is learning to set your anxiety and catastrophizing aside so that you're not just focused on how awful it is. We also experience tension, distress, nervousness, and irritability when we are in pain. So sometimes when my wife starts snapping at me, almost never happens, right? But after a moment, she'll apologize. I'm sorry. It's just my neck's and shoulders really bothering me. I need to get to the chiropractor. And so it's made me really irritable. So recognizing that and controlling it is self-regulating it so that I don't get so irritated. And then the role of stress, because pain and stress are closely associated, and we already have enough stress in our lives. So that's the problem with pain. So what do we do? Well, changing your thoughts and expectations. So saying to yourself, I can manage this. I'm sure when I get to the doctor will have an easy explanation. It'll be fine. No problem. Let me set this aside right now. Meditation is another good strategy. I'm not good at it, but mindfulness, meditation helps a lot of people stop focusing on their pain and manage their awareness in other ways. And then distraction. So, that shoulder really hurts, but let me ignore that by going and reading in my book or watching TV or going out for a walk or whatever. Now, these are hard things to implement with a kid with charge, especially those like Jacob who are nonvocal. And Jacob can't really tell me directly when he's in pain. He shows me through his behaviors. But if he shows a pain behavior, we immediately respond. And I think over the years, that gives him comfort because he knows we're going to do something. So one of the ways he shows behavior is by sticking things in his neck and wrenching his neck against them. We see him doing that, and we're going to give him some pain medication and take him to the doctor. And he's always very happy to go to the doctor in those circumstances because he's figured out that we're taking care of him. So communicating to kids that when we suspect you're in pain, we will take care of it. We will manage it. We will solve it. Gives them the confidence that things will be okay and they don't have to necessarily behave very, very badly. All right, next one. So this is self-regulation of our sensory systems. I went through it before in terms of the vestibular, proprioceptive, visual. And this was, the girl that the school wouldn't let her hang upside down, which was a huge, huge mistake. Our kids know when their sensory system is wacky. And they may do weird things. They may take their finger paints and paint their face. They may go to a vibrating toy and play with that. They may throw some things. I mean, I almost any imaginable behavior could be a way of managing the sensory issues. I think one of Jacob's favorite things is to lie down and do stuff with his fingers, which I can't quite mimic. But that's what manages his sensory system so he can get himself back under control. All right, next one. Okay, self-regulation of anxiety. Making life more regulated. Routine and predictability are so incredibly helpful. So looking at the pictures there, I mean, what is your routine? You get up, brush teeth, take shower, eat something, get dressed, get in your car, go to work, do work stuff, come home, relax, watch TV, go to bed. I'm not saying that has to be everybody's routine at all, but I do believe that routine is the best way to manage, to learn to regulate one's anxiety, because I know what I'm doing. Now, on top of that, you want to make sure you have a good calendar system. A visual calendar system is best so that your kid can predict their day. They can look at the picture and say, okay, this is what we're doing next. When they're done, they can take the picture off and put it in the finish box because they know what the next one is. Organizing their day around that kind of routine is extremely beneficial in helping them with self-regulation. All right, next slide. So thank you for having me and for listening. This is my research lab, although it really isn't because too many of these people have graduated and moved on. But some of them are still my research team. It's been such a delight over the years to have students who are bright, inquisitive thinkers. I will say that there's one guy in the picture besides me, and he was a junior here at Central Michigan, and he emailed me one day and said, I have CHARGE syndrome. Could I come work with you? And I could not say no, obviously, if he had CHARGE syndrome. And he was great in the lab because he could share so much personal insight of his own experience. He's now graduated. He's working at some kind of agency. I forget which one it is right now, but doing very, very well with his life. So thank you. And now I'd be happy to respond to questions.